The transport shuttle's docking bay filled with the usual chaos of arrival day at the Galactic Academy. Hovering luggage scanners, nervous alien parents saying goodbye to their offspring, and the perpetual hum of translation devices working overtime. But today felt different. Today, the security checkpoint was making sounds that checkpoint technology wasn't supposed to make. "Run that through again," Chief Security Officer Talon said, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he stared at the scanner readout. The machine beeped word, then made what could only be described as a confused electronic sigh. The human standing beside the luggage conveyor belt looked entirely unbothered by the mechanical crisis she had apparently caused. Medium height, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing what appeared to be standard Academy-issued clothing. Nothing about her screamed security nightmare, which Talvin was beginning to suspect might be exactly the problem. "Is there an issue?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Her tone was polite, patient, the kind of calm that made seasoned security officers very nervous. "Your belongings are registering as potentially hazardous materials," Talvin replied, consulting his datapad with increasing confusion. "According to our scans, you've packed what appears to be medical supplies sufficient for a field hospital, emergency rations designed for hostile environments, and..." He paused, checking the readout again. "Something our systems are identifying as improvised survival equipment with a threat assessment rating that doesn't actually exist in our database. The human, Alex, according to..." Her transfer documents looked genuinely puzzled. "Oh, that's just my first aid kit and some backup supplies. Standard stuff from home." "No standard." Talvin's voice cracked slightly behind him. 2 junior security officers were furiously typing on their terminals, trying to make sense of readings that suggested this single human had packed enough emergency medical supplies to treat battlefield casualties. Sure, bandages, antibiotics, pain relievers, suture kits, emergency splints, water purification tablets, protein bars. "Miss Alex," he said carefully, "our medical scanners are indicating that your first aid kit contains surgical instruments and enough pharmaceutical supplies to stock a trauma center. Could you explain why a student would need access to equipment designed for major medical emergencies?" Alex blinked. "Well, you never know what might happen. Better to be prepared, right?" The scanner chose that moment to emit a sound that was definitely not in its manual. A high-pitched whine, followed by what sounded suspiciously like mechanical weeping. "Sir," the junior officer said, his voice tight with a kind of barely controlled panic that comes from staring at data that shouldn't exist. "You need to see this. The medical pre-scanning protocols we run on all incoming students, they're throwing error codes." Talvin turned to look at the display, and his 4 eyes went wide. "What kind of error codes?" "The kind that happen when our systems try to process medical data that exceeds their programmed parameters for survivable conditions." The security checkpoint had gone quiet. Other arriving students, a mix of crystalline Valinari, the plant-like thornweave delegation, and several species Talvin couldn't immediately identify, had formed a loose crowd around the scene, their various sensory organs focused on the unfolding drama. "I think," Alex said slowly, "there might be some kind of misunderstanding," Miss Alex Talvian said, his voice taking on the formal tone he usually reserved for diplomatic incidents. "As part of standard academy enrollment procedures, all students undergo basic medical screening. This allows us to ensure proper health care, accommodation, and emergency protocols." He paused, consulting his datapad again. Your preliminary medical data is unprecedented. Unprecedented? Palvin looked around the checkpoint, noting the growing audience of alien students and parents. This was definitely not a conversation. For a public setting, perhaps we should discuss this in private. 10 minutes later, they were seated in a small conference room adjacent to the security checkpoint. The medical officer, who'd been called in, a tall, spindly creature with too many joints and an expression of profound confusion, was reviewing Alex's medical history on a secured terminal. The problem, Dr. Silthara explained, her voice carrying the kind of strained patience that came from dealing with impossible data, is that our medical systems are designed around the biological limitations of known sapient species. When we input your medical information, the system assumes there are critical errors in the data. What kind of errors? Alex asked. Dr. Silthara consulted her notes. Well, for example, our records indicate that you've sustained what we would classify as potentially fatal injuries on multiple occasions. Yet you're obviously alive and apparently unimpaired. Oh, you mean like the broken bones and stuff? The doctor's elongated neck swiveled to stare at Alex directly. Broken bones, plural. Well, yeah. I mean, I played soccer for 6 years, did some rock climbing, tried snowboarding a few times. You're going to take some hits. Dr. Silara's fingers, all 12 of them, began typing rapidly on her terminal. According to your medical records, you've experienced 14 separate bone fractures, multiple soft tissue injuries, 2 concussions, various lacerations requiring surgical intervention, and... She paused, rereading something on her screen, something listed as near-drowning incident, full recovery. That was just a swimming accident when I was 12. I was fine after a few days in the hospital. The silence in the room stretched uncomfortably long. Miss Alex Talvin said, "Finally, in my species, a single bone fracture is considered a life-threatening emergency. Our medical protocols assume that any sapient being who has sustained the level of physical trauma documented in your records would be, well, not sitting here having a conversation." Alex looked from Talina to Dr. Sultara, beginning to realize that this wasn't just bureaucratic confusion. Are you saying that other species don't bounce back from injuries? Bounce back? Dr. Zulthara's voice rose slightly. Miss Alex, according to your dental records alone, you've had multiple surgical procedures to your jaw structure. In most species, cranial surgery of any kind is an extremely high-risk procedure with significant mortality rates. I just had my wisdom teeth out. Dr. Siltara made a note on her pad, and this wisdom teeth procedure, was this performed under emergency conditions due to life-threatening complications? No, it's just a regular thing humans do. Preventive medicine. The 2 aliens exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their growing concern. Miss Alex Telvin said carefully, "When you applied to the Academy, were you aware that Earth is classified as a Category 7 death world?" Alex shook her head. "What does that mean?" "It means," Dr. Sultara said, consulting another screen, "that your planet's environmental conditions are considered hostile to most known forms of sapient life. Extreme weather variations, high atmospheric pressure, elevated radiation exposure, endemic biological hazards." She trailed off, reading, "The classification notes indicate that Earth's surface conditions would be fatal to approximately 93% of known sapient species within a matter of days. But that's just normal weather, normal for a death world. Yes." Alex sat back in her chair, processing this information. So, when you look at my medical records, we see evidence of a life form that has not only survived in an environment that would kill most sapient beings, but has thrived sufficiently to pursue higher education. Talvin finished. From our perspective, your medical history reads like a catalog of survivable catastrophes. The room fell quiet again, except for the soft humming of the ventilation system and the distant sounds of the Academy's orientation. Activities continuing outside. There's something else, Dr. Sarah said, her tone shifting to something Alex couldn't quite identify. Your psychological evaluation scores, is there a problem with those? Not a problem exactly, but they indicate stress tolerance and adaptability levels that are unusually high. The Academy's standard psychological assessments are designed to identify students who can handle the challenges of multi-species education and potential high-stress situations. She paused. Your scores suggest that our most challenging scenarios would register as mild inconveniences. Alex laughed, a short, surprised sound. I mean, I've been through some stuff, but I wouldn't say I'm unusually tough or anything. Talvin and Dr. Solara exchanged another look. Miss Alex, Talvin said slowly, in the Academy's 300-year history, we have never enrolled a student from a Category 7 death world. Our facilities, our curriculum, our emergency protocols, they're all designed around the physical and psychological limitations of species from more hospitable environments. Are you saying I can't attend? Oh no, Dr. Solara said quickly. Quite the opposite. You're cleared for enrollment. It's just that we're going to need to make some adjustments. Through the conference room's window, Alex could see other students moving through the Academy's main corridors. Most of them looked fragile in ways she'd never considered. Thin limbs, delicate features, movements that suggested they treated their bodies like precision instruments that might break if handled roughly. What kind of adjustments? Talvin consulted his data. Pad again, well, for starters, we'll need to completely recalibrate our medical emergency protocols. Our current procedures assume that significant physical trauma requires immediate life support. Intervention. He looked up at her. Based on your medical history, you appear to treat significant physical trauma as a minor inconvenience that resolves itself with basic first aid, and Dr. Silthara added, we'll need to review our psychological support services. The Academy provides counseling and stress management resources for students dealing with the challenges of interspecies education. However, our current stress management techniques are designed for beings whose stress tolerance appears to be considerably lower than yours. Alex nodded slowly. So what you're telling me is that I'm accidentally the toughest student you've ever enrolled, and you're not sure how to handle that? Tal said, is an excellent and accurately summarizing summary of our situation. Outside, the Academy's orientation chimes began to sound, signaling the start of the formal welcome ceremonies. Through the window, Alex could see groups of alien students making their way toward the main auditorium, their various forms of locomotion creating a fascinating display of biological diversity. Well, Alex said, standing up, I guess we'll figure it out as we go. As she reached for the door, Dr. Sultara called out, Miss Alex, one more thing. During your time here, if you experience what you consider to be a minor injury or a small amount of discomfort, please report it to medical immediately, because what you consider minor might require emergency intervention for any other species in the Academy, and what you consider serious might be... She paused, consulting her notes. Well, we're not sure our medical facilities are equipped to handle what you consider serious. Alex grinned. Don't worry, Doc. I'm pretty hard to break. As the door closed behind her, Talvin turned to Dr. Solara. "Should we contact the Academy administration about this?" "Oh yes," she replied, already typing notes into her terminal. "And probably the Galactic Medical Council, and possibly the Department of Interc." She paused. "Actually, I think we should contact everyone." But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was what they discovered when they pulled up Earth's full planetary classification file and realized that Alex wasn't even considered particularly tough by human standards. The Academy's survival training complex had been designed by the galaxy's leading experts in extreme scenario preparation. It featured climate-controlled environments that could simulate the harsh conditions of dozens of different worlds, obstacle courses calibrated to challenge the physical limits of various species, and emergency response scenarios that pushed students to their psychological breaking points. What it had never been designed for was a student who treated life-threatening emergencies as a warm-up exercise. Professor Quandar stood in the control booth overlooking Training Base 7, watching the holographic displays with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. His 3 primary eyes tracked the human's movement through the obstacle course, while his secondary eye monitored the biometric readings that were making his equipment question its own programming. "She's been in there for 47 minutes, his teaching assistant Brixen reported from the monitoring station. "Heart rate is elevated but stable. Stress hormones are within normal parameters for her species." He paused, rechecking his readings. "Sir, the environmental controls are set to conditions that would incapacitate most students within 15 minutes. Professor Wander adjusted the display to show Alex navigating what the Academy euphemistically called the hostility maze, a series of obstacles designed to simulate the kind of environmental challenges that might be encountered on dangerous worlds. Extreme temperature, fluctuations, unstable terrain, limited visibility, and atmospheric conditions required full environmental suits. Alex, in Academy uniform, was having fun, singing cheerfully while navigating unstable terrain and simulated toxic gas vents. Voice from the observation deck, "We have a problem." Handar turned to see a cluster of his other students, a mix of species from across the galaxy, pressed against the viewing windows, staring down at the training bay with expressions of profound confusion and growing alarm. Kalaris, a crystalline being from the Harmony clusters, stepped forward. "Professor, is she supposed to be enjoying this?" "The course difficulty is set to level 8, added Thormax, whose species considered level 3 to be genuinely challenging. "Why isn't she in distress?" Professor Wanda consulted his curriculum notes. The survival training course was designed to be progressively challenging, starting with basic environmental adaptation and building up to scenarios that would test students' absolute limits. The idea was to help students understand their capabilities and limitations in controlled conditions before they encountered real-world dangers. The problem was that Alex appeared to have no limitations. "Perhaps we should increase the difficulty," Brixelon suggested. "We're already at the maximum setting for the equipment," Wand replied, watching as Alex completed a section that required climbing a near-vertical rock face while avoiding simulated predator attacks. She was moving with a kind of casual confidence that suggested she'd done this before, possibly for fun. "Sir," Rexon said, his voice taking on a note of concern, "I'm getting reports from the other training bays. Apparently word has spread about the humans' performance, and students from other classes are requesting permission to observe." Through the control booth's windows, Quandar could see that Brixen was right. The observation deck was filling up with students and faculty members, all staring down at Alex with the kind of intense fascination usually reserved for exotic zoo specimens. "This is highly irregular," muttered Professor Vixandre, the Academy's leading expert in xenobiology, as she joined the crowd at the windows. "Her physiological responses are completely outside normal parameters." "Outside normal parameters? How?" "Quandar hoi, Jiaosu Vixander, Tam Kao Mai Quet Didong Guoko, Su Diu Chin Nhiệt Độ Cơ Thể Guoko, duy trì chức năng tối ưu trong điều kiện gây sốc nhiệt ở hầu hết các loài. Hệ hô hấp của cô xử lý mô phỏng khí quyển mà không có bất kỳ căng thẳng rõ ràng nào, và mô cơ của cô dường như hoạt động ở mức hiệu quả không bền vững." Ở dưới, trong khu huấn luyện, Alex đã đến phần cuối cùng của khóa học. Một kịch bản mô phỏng khẩn cấp yêu cầu sinh viên điều hướng qua nhiều mồi nguy hiểm, trong khi mang theo một người bạn đồng hành bị thương đến nơi an toàn. Manakwan, she'd been given weight approximately 60 kilos and was designed to be an awkward, challenging burden. She hoisted it over her shoulder in a fireman's carry and began jogging through the obstacle course. "She's jogging," Brixland said, his voice flat with disbelief, while carrying a 60 kiloliters load through level 8 environmental hazards, and she's still humming. The observation deck had gone completely silent. Students who had been chattering nervously about their own upcoming training sessions were now staring with the kind of odd silence typically reserved for natural phenomena. "Professor Wanda, a voice from the Academy's communication system, please report to the main administrative office immediately. Bring your training records for the human student." 20 minutes later, Quandar found himself in a conference room that was considerably more crowded than usual. In addition to the normal administrative staff, the meeting included representatives from the Academy's medical department, the Xenobiology Research Division, and what appeared to be several officials from off-world. Dean Morteff, whose species was known for his calm demeanor and methodical approach to problem-solving, Professor Quandar looked like he was having the kind of day that required strong medication. "Thank you for joining us. We need to discuss the human student's performance in your survival training course." "Certainly, Dean, though I should note that her performance has been exemplary." "Exemplary?" Dean Morteff consulted his notes. "According to your preliminary report, she completed the Level 8 hostility maze in under an hour, with no signs of physical distress, no request for assistance, and apparently while enjoying herself." "It's correct." One of the off-world officials, a tall, thin being with pale skin and large eyes, leaned forward. "Professor, I'm Commander Yolnith from the Galactic Defense Coordination Office. We've been monitoring reports about this human student with considerable interest. Monitoring Earth is classified as a restricted observation world," Commander Yulth explained. "Contact has been limited, and we have very little data about human capabilities. Your student represents our first opportunity to conduct direct assessment of human physical and psychological parameters." Dean Morteff cleared his throat. "Which brings us to the issue at hand, Professor. How do you intend to continue training a student whose capabilities appear to exceed your equipment's maximum settings?" Professor Wanda had been dreading this question. "Well, Dean, I'm not entirely sure. Our training protocols are based on the assumption that students have definable limits. Alex appears to have different limits." "Different how?" "I'm not sure she has limits. At least not limits that our equipment can identify." The room fell quiet, except for the sound of several officials typing notes into their data pads. "There's another issue," Professor Vixandra said from her seat near the back of the room. "The other students are becoming increasingly concerned about the disparity in capabilities. Several have requested transfer to different sections, and some are questioning whether they're adequately prepared for the Academy's programs. Are they asking legitimate questions? Dean Mort asked. Well, Professor Vixandra consulted her notes when your most challenging survival scenario is completed as a casual warm-up exercise by one student. It does raise questions about the adequacy of the curriculum for everyone else. Commander Yulf leaned back in his chair. Have you considered that the issue might not be with your curriculum, but with your understanding of human capabilities? What do you mean? I mean that perhaps your equipment and protocols aren't inadequate. Perhaps humans are simply operating on a completely different scale of physical and psychological resilience. Dr. Filer, the Academy's chief medical officer, spoke up from his position near the window. Commander, with all due respect, that's impossible. Biological limitations are universal constants. No species can simply ignore the fundamental constraints of physics and biology. Can't they? Commander Unith consulted his own datapad. Dr. Filer, have you reviewed the preliminary data about Earth's environmental conditions? Of course. It's a Category 7 death world with extreme environmental variations, high gravity, elevated radiation levels, and numerous biological hazards. And yet humans not only survive in those conditions, they thrive. They've developed complex civilizations, advanced technology, and apparently consider their environment normal and comfortable. Dr. Furr was quiet for a moment. You're suggesting that what we consider extreme conditions are actually normal, baseline parameters for human development? I'm suggesting that we may have fundamentally misunderstood what humans consider challenging. Dean Morte looked around the room. So what do you recommend we do short-term? Commander Yulnith said, I recommend you continue with the standard curriculum, but be prepared to make significant adjustments long-term. I think we need to seriously reconsider our assumptions about human capabilities and what that might mean for interspecies cooperation. Professor Quandar raised his hand tentatively. Dean, there's something else. During today's training session, several students asked Alex about human recreational activities. When she described what humans do for fun, 3 students requested immediate medical consultation. What did she tell them? She mentioned something called extreme sports, gave a brief description of activities like skydiving and rock climbing, and then showed them some images on her personal communication device. The images showed humans voluntarily engaging in activities that our safety protocols classify as life-threatening emergencies. The room was completely silent for entertainment. Professor Quandar added. Commander Yulnith made a note on his datapad. I think we're going to need to significantly expand our research into human psychology as well. Through the conference room's windows, they could see Alex walking across the Academy's main quad with a group of other students. She was gesturing animatedly while describing something, and the other students were listening with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for survival lectures. What do you suppose she's telling them? Dean Mordith asked. Dr. Furr consulted his portable scanner. Based on the elevated stress indicators from the other students, I'd guess she's sharing more information about human recreational activities, but what happened next made galactic history, and not in a good way. Because that's when Alex casually mentioned that humans had figured out how to make some of their death world conditions even more challenging, just to keep things interesting. The Academy's central cafeteria was designed to accommodate the dietary needs of 47 different species, featured atmospheric controls for various breathing requirements, and maintained strict protocols to prevent accidental poisoning through cross-contamination of food supplies. What it wasn't designed for was the kind of conversation that made entire tables of alien students question their fundamental understanding of the universe. Alex sat at what had become known as the human table, not because she was antisocial, but because other students had started gravitating toward her during mealtimes, with the fascination of researchers studying a particularly interesting specimen. Today's lunch crowd included Rasha from the Aquatic Depths Collective, Numbre, whose crystalline physiology required specialized nutrition, and about a dozen other students representing various corners of the galaxy. "The wait," Rivershaw said, her gills slits fluttering with what her species displayed when confused. "You're telling us that humans intentionally make their food spicy?" Alex paused in the middle of explaining Earth cuisine, realizing she'd somehow stumbled into another cultural minefield. "Well, not exactly spicy. It's different, but the capsaicin compounds you described." Numbre interjected, his crystalline shifting to a slightly orange hue that indicated deep concern. "Those are classified as chemical irritants your species consumes." "Chemical irritants for pleasure, I mean. When you put it like that, it sounds weird." The table went quiet around them. The normal cafeteria chatter continued, but Alex was becoming aware that their conversation was drawing attention from nearby tables. Students were turning in their seats, extending sensory organs in their direction, and generally exhibiting the kind of behavior that suggested something interesting was happening. Alex said to laugh, a tall, thin being whose species communicated partly through color changes in their skin. "Yesterday, you mentioned that humans engage in recreational activities that involve deliberately placing themselves in dangerous situations at extreme sports, and today you're telling us that humans consume substances that cause physical discomfort for enjoyment." Alex looked around the table at the collection of alien faces, some familiar, others entirely outside her experience of what faces were supposed to look like, all focused on her with varying degrees of concern and fascination. "Are we the weird ones?" she asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. "The thing is," Ribasasha said carefully, "most sapient species develop recreational activities and dietary preferences based on what promotes survival and well-being. Pleasure responses typically reinforce behaviors that are beneficial for the individual and the species, right? That makes sense that human recreational activities appear to deliberately seek out potentially harmful situations, and human dietary preferences include consuming substances that trigger pain responses. Time." Loth's skin shifted to a deep purple, which Alex was learning meant profound confusion. From an evolutionary perspective, this suggests either that humans have developed in an environment so dangerous that seeking additional danger serves some adaptive purpose, or that what humans consider dangerous isn't actually dangerous for humans. The conversation had attracted enough attention that students from nearby tables were moving closer, creating an impromptu audience around Alex's table. She could see representatives from at least a dozen different species, all listening with the kind of intense focus that made her feel like she was accidentally giving a lecture. "Can you give us some examples?" asked Lenore, a small fairy being whose species was known for their cautiousness. Approach to life, Alex thought for a moment. Well, there's mountain climbing, ascending elevated terrain. Norbury noted that seems reasonable for species development. No, not just ascending, we climbed vertical rock faces thousands of feet above the ground, using minimal safety equipment, often in weather conditions that could kill us. If we make mistakes, the cafeteria had gotten noticeably quieter. Even students who weren't part of the conversation had stopped talking to listen. And the purpose of this activity? Rivasha asked. Fun challenge. The view is usually pretty nice. You risk death for aesthetic appreciation. Team Moth's skin had shifted to a color Alex hadn't seen before. Something between orange and purple that probably didn't have a positive meaning. Well, when you put it like that, what other examples are there? Lenore asked, though her voice suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Alex paused, suddenly aware that she was treading into territory that might cause problems. But the expectant faces around her, alien faces but unmistakably expectant, made it hard to avoid answering. They're skydiving. We jump out of perfectly functional aircraft at high altitude and fall toward the ground at terminal velocity, using fabric parachutes to hopefully slow down enough to survive the landing. The silence was profound. We also have something called free solo climbing, where we climb those vertical rock faces I mentioned earlier, but without any safety equipment at all. A small squeaking sound came from somewhere in the crowd. Alex looked around and saw that one of the students, a member of a species she didn't recognize, appeared to have fainted. Are there more? Timarth asked, his skin now a color that Alex was pretty sure indicated either deep fascination or impending panic. Well, there's base jumping where we jump off cliffs and buildings and use parachutes to land safely. There's deep sea diving where we descend to depths that would crush most life forms. There's volcano boarding where we slide down the sides of active volcanoes on modified sleds. Another student fainted. There's also extreme weather chasing where we deliberately seek out and get as close as possible to tornadoes, hurricanes, and other dangerous weather phenomena. For what purpose Rivasha's gill slits were fluttering so rapidly they were creating a visible current in the air around her research. Mostly, sometimes, just for the thrill, you seek out planetary-scale destruction events for entertainment. Alex was beginning to realize that this conversation was taking a turn she hadn't anticipated. The cafeteria was now almost completely silent, with what appeared to be most of the student body focused on their table. It's not that big a deal, she said, trying to diffuse. I mean, we take precautions. What kind of precautions? Numbri asked. Well, we use specialized equipment, follow safety protocols, and make sure we have emergency backup plans. Emergency backup plans for approaching planetary destruction events, Tim Lareth repeated slowly. And this is considered normal recreational behavior for humans? Alex looked around the cafeteria, suddenly aware that she was representing her entire species to an audience of alien students who were hanging on her every word. I mean, not everyone does extreme sports. Some people prefer quieter hobbies such as reading, music, sports. What kind of sports? Lenore asked tentatively. Alex paused, realizing she was about to step into another minefield. Well, there's football, where two teams try to carry a ball across a field while the other team tries to tackle them. There's hockey, where players skate on ice at high speed and use sticks to hit a small disc while trying to avoid being checked into walls. There's boxing, where two people hit each other until one of them can't continue. They will hit each other? Rivasha's voice was barely a whisper. It's regulated. There are rules. The rules permit violence. Well, violence, it's about skill and strategy, not just fighting. The student who had fainted earlier was apparently conscious again, because Alex heard another small squeaking sound, followed by what sounded like a thud. Are there, Tinwolf said very carefully, any human recreational activities that don't involve deliberate exposure to danger or physical harm? Alex thought about it. Sure, there's gardening. The visible relief around the table was palpable. Gardening involves the cultivation of plant life, Nomrai said. That seems appropriately peaceful, right? Though some people get really into competitive landscaping, extreme topiary, carnivorous plant cultivation, carnivorous plants, plants that eat meat. Some people collect them as a hobby. You domesticate predatory vegetation for entertainment. Alex was starting to suspect that every hobby she mentioned was going to cause problems. They're not really dangerous to humans. They mostly eat insects. Mostly. Well, some of the bigger ones can handle small animals, but you'd have to really work at it to get hurt by a Venus flytrap. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Alex Rasha said finally, "Can you describe a typical day on Earth? Just ordinary, everyday activities?" Alex thought about it. Well, people get up, eat breakfast, go to work or school, maybe exercise, spend time with family and friends, watch entertainment, go to sleep. The exercise, what does that involve? Running, lifting weights, swimming, cycling, martial arts combat training, self-defense techniques, but also for fitness and discipline. Humans train for combat as a recreational fitness activity. Some do. It's good exercise, and it's useful to know how to defend yourself from what? Alex paused, realizing she was about to explain human society to an audience that was already questioning whether humans were essentially a warrior species. Other humans, mostly crime, conflicts, that sort of thing. Humans regularly engage in intraspecies violence. Not regularly. I mean, most people never get in fights. But it happens enough that learning self-defense makes sense. The cafeteria was now completely silent, except for the hum of the ventilation systems and the occasional sound of someone fainting. Alex Time Lord said his. Skin, now a deep, dark color that Alex was pretty sure indicated either profound concern or terror. What percentage of human deaths are caused by other humans? Alex realized she was about to drop a statistical bomb that would probably cause more students to faint. I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but historically war and violence have been pretty significant causes of human mortality. War, large-scale organized conflict between groups of humans. How large-scale? Alex did some mental math, trying to figure out how to explain human military history without causing a panic. Well, the biggest wars involved millions of people and lasted for years. The thudding sounds were becoming more frequent, and then one of the younger students, a small tentacled being from a species Alex didn't recognize, raised what appeared to be a limb and asked the question that changed everything. Alex, if humans fight each other that much, what happened to all the other species that used to live on Earth? The Academy's final assessment chamber had been designed to test every aspect of a student's preparation for life in the galactic community. It combined physical challenges, psychological evaluation, cultural sensitivity scenarios, and emergency response protocols into a comprehensive examination that typically took 3 days to complete and left most students emotionally and physically exhausted. Alex finished it in 6 hours and asked if there was a more advanced version. Dean Morte stood in the observation booth, watching the readouts with the kind of expression typically reserved for natural disasters or equipment malfunctions around him. Nom Jiang Vian, Canbo Quan Li và đại diện to các chính phủ thiên hạ đang xem xét dữ liệu thách thức hiểu biết cơ bản của họ về khả năng sinh học. Kịch bản cuối cùng, giáo sư Darwin báo cáo từ trạm giám sát của mình, được thiết kế để mô phỏng sự cố hệ thống thảm khốc, đòi hỏi quy trình sơ tán khẩn cấp. Sinh viên được yêu cầu thể hiện khả năng lãnh đạo, quản lý tài nguyên và ứng phó khủng hoảng. đồng thời duy trì sự ổn định tâm lý trong điều kiện khắc nghiệt. Stress and her performance, Dean Morte asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She organized the evacuation with military-level efficiency, improvised solutions to problems our scenarios hadn't anticipated, and Professor Darwin paused, checking his readings again. She somehow completed objectives that weren't actually possible, given the constraints we programmed into the simulation. Not possible? How? The scenario included a structural collapse that blocked the primary evacuation route. Standard protocol calls for students to locate and secure the secondary evacuation route, which takes approximately 40 minutes to clear. Alex moved the structural debris. Dean Mortith turned to stare at the display, showing Alex in the post-assessment debriefing room. She looked relaxed, alert, and completely unaffected by what was supposed to be the most challenging examination the Academy could provide. She actually moved structural debris that was programmed to be immovable. The debris was holographic, but it was tied to physical force feedback systems. Moving it should have required equipment we didn't provide. Professor Darwin consulted his notes. According to the simulation parameters, the debris had a mass equivalent to approximately 3 tons. Commander Yulth, who had been monitoring the assessment from the beginning, looked up from his own data analysis. Professor, what's the typical graduation rate for students taking the final assessment? Approximately 73% pass on their first attempt. Most require 2 or 3 attempts to demonstrate full competency. And how many students have ever completed the assessment in under 8 hours? Professor Darwin checked his historical records. None. The previous record was 11 hours and 47 minutes, set by a student whose species is known for enhanced cognitive processing speed. The observation booth fell quiet except for the soft humming of monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of normal Academy operations. There's something else, Dr. Fleth said from his position near the medical monitoring station. During the psychological stress evaluation, Alex's biometric readings remained stable through scenarios that typically trigger significant stress responses in other students. What kind of scenario? Isolation, resource scarcity, time, pressure, threat assessment, moral decision-making under duress. Dr. Filer listed the assessment categories. Her stress indicators barely registered changes that would be considered within normal variation for her species. Which brings us, Commander Yulth said, to the larger question we've been avoiding. Dean Mortith turned to face the commander. Which question is that? What are we going to do about this? The question hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Through the observation booth's windows, they could see Alex sitting patiently in the debriefing room, apparently reading something on her personal communication device while waiting for her results. The Academy's mission, Dean Mort said slowly, is to prepare students for leadership roles in interspecies cooperation and galactic citizenship. Our curriculum is designed to challenge students, develop their capabilities, and ensure they're ready for the complexities of the modern galaxy. Right, Commander Yolith agreed. But what do you do when a student arrives already possessing capabilities that exceed your most advanced training? More importantly, Dr. Filler added, what do you do when that student represents a species that no one in the galaxy properly understands? Mortith consulted his notes from the past several weeks. The reports read like a catalog of impossible events, survival training that couldn't challenge her, medical protocols that didn't apply, psychological assessments that suggested stress tolerance levels that broke the Academy's measurement systems, and now a final assessment completed with efficiency that suggested their most challenging examination was inadequate preparation for someone of her capability. Commander Dean Mortith said, "You mentioned that Earth is under restricted observation protocols. What exactly does that mean?" Commander Ulith exchanged glances with the other government representatives present. "It means that the Galactic Council has classified Earth as a world requiring careful monitoring before full contact protocols are established." Careful monitoring for what? For assessment of whether the species presents potential risks or benefits to galactic stability. The observation booth went very quiet, and Dean Mort said carefully, "What has Alex's performance here contributed to that assessment?" Commander Yulnith consulted his official datapad. "Dean, in the past month we've documented evidence that humans possess physical capabilities that exceed known parameters for most sapient species, psychological resilience that suggests adaptation to conditions most species would find traumatic, and problem-solving abilities that allow them to overcome challenges specifically designed to be insurmountable. You're suggesting that humans are... I am suggesting that humans appear to have evolved under conditions so challenging that what we consider extreme scenarios are simply normal baseline conditions for their development." Commander Yulnith paused. "And if that's true, then we need to completely reconsider our approach to contact with Earth." Dr. Felice spoke up from his monitoring station. "There's something else. Alex's medical data suggests that human biological systems are far more robust and adaptable than our models predicted. If her capabilities are representative of her species, then Earth might not be a Category 7 death world because it's dangerous," Professor Darwin finished. "It might be Category 7 because that's what humans consider livable." The implications of that statement settled over the observation booth like a heavy blanket. Commander Dean Mort said, "What are your recommendations?" Commander Yulth was quiet for a long moment, reviewing his notes and consulting with the other government representatives through what appeared to be encrypted communication devices. "Short term," he said finally, "we recommend that Alex complete her academy education with full honors and recognition. Her performance has been exemplary by any standard, and long term, we need to convene an emergency session of the Galactic Council to discuss Earth's classification status and contact protocols." "What kind of discussion?" Commander Yulnith looked directly at Dean Mort. "The kind of discussion that happens when you realize you've been fundamentally wrong about something important." Through the observation booth's windows, they could see Alex checking the time on her communication device. She appeared to be getting restless, waiting for her assessment results. "Should we inform her about these implications?" Dean Mort asked. "I think Commander Ulith said that would be premature. For now, she's a successful academy graduate who's demonstrated exceptional capabilities. What those capabilities mean for interspecies relations is a matter for the Council to determine." Dr. Fair made a note on his medical pad. "Dean, there is one more thing. During Alex's time here, we've received inquiries from 17 different species requesting information about human capabilities and potential contact protocols." "What kind of inquiries?" "The kind that suggest other species have been monitoring our reports and are very interested in the results." Dean Morteith considered this. "Are these friendly inquiries?" "Some are, others are." Dr. Fehler paused. "Others are from species that have historically been concerned about potential threats to galactic stability." Commander Yul Neth stood up from his chair. "Dean, I think it's time we informed Alex that she's graduated and arranged for her transportation back to Earth." And then we have some very interesting conversations with the Galactic Council about what it means to share a galaxy with a species that treats our most extreme challenges as normal Tuesday activities. As they prepared to deliver Alex's graduation results, Professor Darwin made one final note in his assessment records. Student demonstrates capabilities that exceed Academy measurement parameters. Recommend immediate review of curriculum standards and assessment protocols for potential future human students. But the most important note came from Commander Yulnith's official report to the Galactic Council. Based on comprehensive evaluation, humans appear to possess capabilities suggesting adaptation to environmental and psychological conditions far exceeding standard. Parameters for sapient species recommend immediate reclassification of Earth from restricted observation to priority diplomatic contact status. The report concluded with a single line that would change interspecies policy for the next century. We were wrong about Earth, we were wrong about humans, and we need to very carefully reconsider what it means to have them as neighbors in this galaxy. 3 months later, when the Galactic Council received additional reports about human space exploration capabilities, military organization, and something called recreational nuclear physics, they issued their most unprecedented diplomatic directive in galactic history: immediate establishment of formal alliance protocols with Earth, with priority consideration for partnership rather than supervision. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy isn't a species that wants to conquer everyone else. Sometimes it's a species that could conquer everyone else, but would rather just get along and maybe share some interesting recipes for spicy.